Hey, what's up everybody? We're going to do a video on arteries today. A little bit of veins, but mostly arteries. So what I've got here to start with is a model that is showing me a pair of veins. So there's a vein on your left, a vein on your right, and an artery in the middle. I can tell that this is a vein over here because it's got thin walls and it has valves. The thin walls and valves are both there because of the low pressure. So low pressure means I don't need a thick wall to withstand it. But low pressure also means there will be a tendency for blood to try and flow backwards, and valves prevent that backflow. Now in this vein over here, I don't see any valves, but I can see its thin wall. My artery has a thicker wall, and its wall is thicker because arteries are high pressure, and that thick wall helps the artery withstand that high pressure. Now, in this picture here, I've got some of my tunics labeled. Well, one of my tunics labeled. The tunics are the layers of the blood vessel wall, and there are 3 tunics. I'm pointing at the innermost tunic. That is called the tunica interna, and it is simple squamous epithelium with a little bit of delicate areolar connective tissue underneath it. And it is the one lining the lumen of the blood vessel in all 3 instances, in the veins and in the artery in the middle here. The orange layer of simple squamous epithelium with a little bit of connective tissue is the tunica interna. Now it's actually the tunica interna that has these extensions that become the valves. All right, so that is one of my tunics. The next tunic, as I work outward here, is my tunica media, which is primarily composed of smooth muscle cells. So tunica media in my vein here, in my artery here, and in my vein over here as well. The contraction of the tunica media will constrict the vessel. The relaxation of the tunica media will dilate the vessel. Okay, my final layer, my final tunic, my external one, which is primarily made of dense irregular connective tissue, is my tunica externa, which I see right here, and out here as well. The tunica externa will bind the vessels to neighboring surrounding structures. Okay, let's look at the real deal here. This is a transverse section of an artery. Here is the lumen. The green arrow is pointing at the tunica interna. So tunica interna, basically if you're next to the lumen, you got the tunica interna. Then I got my tunica media with my yellow arrow, and the black arrow out here is my tunica externa. So in this nice artery, I can see all 3 of my tunics. Here I have an artery, not the whole thing, but this is an artery over here. Blood in the middle. The wavy line is my tunica interna. This is my tunica media. And right here I've got my tunica externa. Over here, this is a vein. Notice the thinner wall here to the vein. Lumen of the vein with some blood in it. Green arrow at my tunica interna. Then this little guy right here with the red arrow is my tunica media. And this outer part is my tunica externa. So I got my 3 layers for my artery, my 3 layers for my vein. And now what we're going to do is we're going to start naming some arteries. We're going to go through a lot of arteries in the human body here. And of course, you're familiar with this picture, this organ. This is the heart. Let me start with my 2 weird arteries. Number 1 here is my pulmonary trunk. Pulmonary trunk comes out of the right ventricle, branches and gives me a left and a right pulmonary artery. So my pulmonary trunk and my pulmonary arteries, they are weird because they are deoxygenated. So they're arteries because they're going away from the heart, but they're weird arteries because they're deoxygenated. Most arteries are carrying oxygenated blood. Now I also see the ascending aorta right here as it comes up from the left ventricle. It curves, becoming the aortic arch. And we know there are 3 branches to the aortic arch. First one is the brachiocephalic, middle one is the left common carotid, and the final one is the left subclavian. So we see those 3 arteries right there. And now what we want to do is kind of zoom out a bit, okay? The heart has been removed. I still see my ascending aorta here. I still see my aortic arch. Now I see my descending aorta. Notice the descending aorta has a portion above the diaphragm in the thoracic cavity. That is my descending thoracic aorta. But then when I get down below the diaphragm into the abdominal cavity, I'm going to have my descending abdominal aorta. And emanating from the descending aorta, I'm going to have all of these little arteries. These are my posterior intercostal arteries. Intercostal means in between the ribs. All right, let's go back up to that aortic arch. Coming off that aortic arch, I see the brachiocephalic artery, which is pretty short here, sneaking up behind the medial part of the clavicle there. I also see the left common carotid artery coming off the aortic arch and going up into that left side of the neck. And I see the left subclavian artery coming over here to the left. Now what I'm about to do is look at what happens to this brachiocephalic artery. The brachiocephalic artery quickly splits into a right common carotid and a right subclavian artery. Now what I want to do is look at the branches of the right subclavian artery and see where it goes. And I'm going to know that whatever I'm doing on the right subclavian artery, the same exact thing is happening over here on the left. So my right subclavian artery quickly gives off a branch going down, kind of like goes down the anterior chest wall. And this is called the internal thoracic artery going down. And we're going to have some anterior intercostal arteries coming off of it. Remember, we had posterior intercostal arteries coming off that descending aorta. Then, if I go back up to my right subclavian artery up here, going upwards from it is the right vertebral artery. That is going to go up through the back of the neck. It's going to go up through the back of the neck, through the cervical vertebrae, and it's actually going to go into the cranial cavity. And we'll see what happens there in a moment. If I then come back to my right subclavian artery and I follow it outward, 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 it's leaving the torso here, getting into the armpit region, and there we have the axillary artery on the right. The axillary artery comes down, 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 gives off some branches we're not worrying about, and the axillary artery then becomes the brachial artery. And remember, whatever's going on with the subclavian on the right is also going on with the subclavian on the left. Okay, we got same stuff in here we did already, but I want to jump in with the brachial artery. It's kind of where we left off in the arm. Just distal to the elbow joint, the brachial artery is going to split. On the lateral side, I'm going to have my right radial artery. On the medial side, I'm going to have my right ulnar artery. Those arteries come down into the wrist region. You probably felt the pulse right here. And those two arteries give off some branches, but they also have branches that are fusing here in a curvy fashion. And this curving guy here is called the right superficial palmar arch. And then coming off of it, we're going to have some metacarpal and some digital arteries as well. And of course, whatever is going on the right side, the right arm, is going to go on over here on the left arm. All right. Going back, there's our aortic arch. We turn this guy to the side to better visualize things. Here's the aortic arch. Here's that first branch of the aortic arch, which is the brachiocephalic artery. We know it splits to give us a right subclavian artery, which we see here, and a right common carotid artery. By the way, also note the right vertebral artery sneaking up the back of the neck, going through these transverse foramina, which you might remember in the cervical vertebrae. Okay, so we see that vertebral artery going up nicely there. Now let's go back to this guy here at the base of the neck. This is the right common carotid artery. The word common tells me that it is going to split. And the right common carotid artery, roughly at the level of the larynx here, is splitting to give me an internal carotid artery, which is going to go inside the skull to feed the brain, and giving me an external carotid artery, which is giving off several branches to feed the face and the skull and external structures. All right, just throwing a model in here for you. This is the anterior chest wall. I mentioned a moment ago that the internal thoracic artery comes down that anterior chest wall. I also see an intercostal artery here. I gotta fix this over here because we're doing arteries right now. So I've got my internal thoracic artery, the red guy going down, and the guy going across there is my anterior intercostal artery. So I'll fix that on the presentation. Sometimes I swear it's like when I do these videos is when I actually catch a mistake that I'm like, how did I not see that before? Anyway, I'll try not to make any more mistakes. Probably will though, probably will. All right, what is going on here? Well, this is a brain. Let me backtrack for a second here. Check out that vertebral artery. The right vertebral artery is sneaking up the back of the neck. It's about to dive through the foramen magnum. And when it does so, here's that vertebral artery. Here's the vertebral artery from the other side. Those two vertebral arteries are paralleling and kind of like feeding the brainstem here. And then the two vertebral arteries are uniting to make the basilar artery. And this basilar artery is giving off more branches to the brainstem. The basilar artery comes up and then splits to give me some posterior cerebral arteries on each side, kind of going back towards the occipital lobe to the cerebellum. All right, so that's how we're getting up to the back of the brain. Now, I'm going to backtrack for a second here. Bear with me, bear with me. Remember the common carotid artery comes up, splits to give me an external and internal carotid artery. The internal carotid artery comes up and dives into the skull through a passageway called the carotid canal. We don't see it here, but note that the internal carotid artery is going into the skull to get to the brain. And here, this cut guy right here is an internal carotid artery. This is another internal carotid artery, the right and the left here. The internal carotid artery is giving off a middle cerebral artery going with branches to that temporal and that frontal lobe, and giving off a guy called the anterior cerebral artery going towards that anterior brain. The internal carotid artery also gives off an artery not pictured here, but I want to mention its existence. That artery that's not pictured is called the ophthalmic artery, and it is going to go ahead and feed that eyeball. Now, by the way, if we look at our basilar artery right here, and we see how it gives off some branches, and it's actually joining up with the carotid and its branches, And we can make like a whole big circle here of all these arteries. This is called the cerebral arterial circle. This is called the cerebral arterial circle. It's also called the circle of Willis. That name is sometimes used as well. All right, I don't have a model of this, but if I'm talking about like where blood is going or asking you how blood gets somewhere, this is all important to know. Okay, excellent. Let's keep going. Yeah, we're done with like the upper body. So what I've got here is, let's kind of orient ourselves a little bit here. Right here, I got the diaphragm. This is my diaphragm right here. Bum, 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 bum. Separating my thoracic cavity above and my abdominal cavity down here. So this big red guy back here, that is my descending abdominal aorta. And right after it goes through the diaphragm, it is going to give off a branch. And this branch, which I'm going to kind of like outline, I don't want to use green actually, got too much green going on. Let's use yellow. So this guy, which I'm going to outline in yellow right here, this short little guy is called the celiac artery. Sometimes he's called the celiac trunk because he's so short. He is the first branch of my descending abdominal aorta. And the word celiac has 3 syllables. It gives off 3 branches itself, including the left gastric artery, which I see right here going up to feed the stomach, the pancreas, and some other organs. I also see the splenic artery going across here, of course, going to the spleen, primarily, as well as some other stuff. Then over here, I got my common hepatic artery. The word hepatic is telling me it is going to my liver. The liver. And the word common tells me it's going to branch, and I see some branching going on here. If I were to go down a bit, I don't see where this guy is beginning because it's covered up by the stomach and the pancreas. But this guy is the second branch off of my abdominal aorta. This is the superior mesenteric artery right here, which I am just covering up in yellow. And the superior mesenteric artery is going to go feed that small intestine. So superior mesenteric artery are its abbreviations, and that is how I start smelling the word. Do I smell words? No, I spell words, right? That's how I start spelling the word small, because this artery is going to go primarily to the small intestine. All right, excellent. Whoa, we got even more stuff going on here. This is my descending abdominal aorta. Check it out. I'm going to put some yellow dots on my descending abdominal aorta. Because why not? Why not? Right? There it is. Up here where the number 1 is, this cut guy right here is my celiac artery. Of course, celiac, 3 branches, left gastric, splenic, common hepatic. I don't see them because it's been cut. I do see my second branch. That is my superior mesenteric, and I see many of his looping branches. He is going mainly to the small intestine, SMA, right? But also a little bit to the large. Anyhow, if there is a superior mesenteric, then you shall not be surprised that there is also an inferior mesenteric artery, which I see right down here, and then I see some of his branches. If the superior goes to the small intestine primarily, then it's going to totally make sense that the inferior goes to the large intestine. Now, as that descending abdominal aorta comes down, eventually about at belly button level, it splits. We get a right common iliac artery here and a left common iliac artery over here. common iliac artery. The word common tells me it is going to split, and I get a little internal iliac artery, which is going to go to structures like the urinary bladder, the uterus, the vagina, the rectum. And then if there's an internal iliac artery, hey, no surprise, there's going to be an external iliac artery, which we're going to follow where that guy goes in a moment. So let's go ahead and do that. But actually, before we do that, let's look at some other stuff. Again, I got my descending abdominal aorta coming down, okay? It's kind of hard to see the celiac artery because he's like right in here. He's so little. But I do see his branches, including the left gastric artery, this little guy right here, the splenic artery over here, and the common hepatic artery right there. So I can see those three branches, and kind of like where those three branches are uniting, right here in the middle, that's the celiac artery. All right, what else do I see? I see an artery feeding my diaphragm, number 1 right here, and its partner on the other side. That is the superior phrenic artery, feeding the diaphragm. The word phrenic refers to the diaphragm. Going down, I see a pair of arteries branching from my abdominal aorta. Number 5 here is labeled. That is the right suprarenal artery. There's the left suprarenal artery. Suprarenal means above the kidney. It refers to the adrenal gland here, which is also known as the suprarenal gland. Anywho, I see my superior mesenteric artery there in the middle, cut again, and kind of almost on level with it, I have a renal artery on my right here, and then a renal artery to the left kidney as well. Below the renal arteries, I'm going to get this guy here and here. Number 8 is the left gonadal artery. Now, we can't tell if this is a male or a female. If it were a female, of course, this would be the left ovarian artery and the right ovarian artery. If it is a boy, they would be testicular. I also see a lumbar artery, number 9 here, and a couple other lumbar arteries as well. And I see this guy coming from the middle here. This is the inferior mesenteric artery. I also see the splitting of my abdominal aorta right here, and this is a common iliac artery, and it's not labeled, but I can see an internal iliac artery right there and an external iliac artery right there. All right, this is really good. All these good arteries, very important. And now we get to go down into the thigh. So we got that abdominal aorta up here. We see it splitting into the 2 common iliac arteries, and I'm going to follow my right one. The right common iliac artery splits to give me an internal iliac artery, that's number 3, primarily feeding organs like the rectum, the urinary bladder, and in females, the uterus and vagina. The external iliac artery comes down here, leaves the pelvic cavity, and becomes the femoral artery. He gives off a bunch of branches we're not going to name. Femoral artery comes down, 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 dives behind the knee, and when it's behind the knee, it is called the popliteal artery. So what we got to do now is figure out where we're going with that popliteal artery. So we've spun the guy around, looking at his lower leg here. There is that popliteal artery. It is branching to give me an anterior tibial artery, which is going towards the front, as well as a posterior tibial artery coming down the back. And this is the one whose pulse you can feel. If you find that inside bump of your ankle, which I know you remember from AP1, was the medial malleolus. There's a pulse right behind it. That's your posterior tibial artery. And I'm seeing my posterior tibial artery give off a branch up high. This is my fibular artery. And then also down low, my posterior tibial artery gives off some plantar arteries as well. Okay, now I'm looking at that anterior tibial artery right here, and I just want to point out one of its branches, which is right at the top of the foot. You can feel a nice pulse there easily as well. That's called the dorsalis pedis artery because it's on the dorsal side of the foot. So, that is it for pictures. What I want you to do now is to go through all these models and look at all the vessels in the models. Listen to me going through the picture again and check out everything on these models. This is my flat man model. We've got everything in the chest labeled here. Got my flat man's head and neck here. I can see a lot of good stuff here as well. I've got his upper arm, his lower arm and hand, his abdomen, his thigh, and then down to his leg. So we can see all that good stuff. And got the other leg as well. I can see some digital arteries in his toes nicely here too. Didn't mention those earlier, but we can see them. And then I switched models here to go through this, looking at all of these guys as well. Got the neck here. I like this guy because I can see the internal carotid artery here. Got the abdomen here. Got the thorax of a brand new model. Neck of a new model. Abdomen. Switched models again for a thorax and a neck. And then I showed you this one earlier with a mistake on it. And I got it here as well. And then the abdomen of this model, pelvis of this model. And then I like this one because I can see those posterior intercostal arteries coming off that descending thoracic aorta. So really nice. I'm just zipping through these models because there's nothing really new here, okay? So go through all those, rewatch the stuff I did at the beginning, and that's pretty much it for, not pretty much, that's it for arteries. We are done with the artery video. As always, thanks for watching. I appreciate you guys who come up and ask me questions and tell me about things in the video. So thank you for doing that. Let me know you watched the whole video. See you later. Bye.